Hello, and welcome back to the Resleevables 6th edition that is going to need some work. I'm your host, Patrick Sullivan, joined by Pro Tour champion and Magic the Gathering Hall of Famer Patrick Chapin, and we are here to discuss one of the most influential core sets of all time. Two things that, in my opinion, that it's famous or infamous for. One of the highest power levels of any core set ever, and two, ushered in a comprehensive rules change, the likes of which the game really hasn't seen before or since.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very crucial, like a very, very impactful turning point, not just because of the specifics of it, but the change in philosophy about how they'd even make the rules in the first place.
Exactly. There was a lot of sort of ad hoc, individual card sort of interactions that you had to know. And 6th edition rules attempted to kind of get it into a comprehensive state. Some strikes and gutters, I would say, along the way that we'll get into, but an effort to really codify the game in a way that hadn't been done up until that point.
Yeah, I mean, from a certain perspective, 6th edition was the first edition where the rules worked.
Sure.
For better or for worse. I mean, the game was kind of... at basically every other set up until then, it was never a cohesive rule set. It was a general framework that then you make all these cards that intentionally break the rules for, and then you try to figure out how to justify and stitch together everything. 6th edition was the first attempt to make a set of rules that are outside of the cards, where the rules are actually the rules. The rules are the rules, instead of this whole philosophy of all the rules are meant to be broken.
Without any further ado, 6th edition. But first, a word from our sponsor over at Tales of Adventure. You can find Tales of Adventure over at toamagic.com, and you can also follow Michael Caffrey, the store owner, on Twitter over at toamichael. You're going to be wanting to follow that Twitter account because he posts weekly deals all the time, and there's stuff there that you can't find on the website. I've been shopping with Michael and Tales of Adventure for years, particularly for high end, where you can find all the cards you're looking at individually scanned. If you are in the United States, they will be going to most, if not all, of the major Magic events, including Magic Fest Chicago. So if you have buys or sells you're trying to take care of, that would be a great time to do it. And make sure to be using promo code Resleevables at checkout for 5% off all of your orders. And all orders sent inside the United States come with free tracking and shipping, no matter how large the order is. Tales of Adventure, Eternal lives here. So the facts of the set. 6th edition, also known as Classic, is the 7th core set in Magic's history, following Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Revised, 4th edition, and 5th edition. It was released on April 28th, 1999, and like all core sets before 10th edition, there was no pre-release for the set and thus no pre-release promo card. It was designed by Bill Rose, who was the lead, along with Charlie Katana and Joel Mick, and developed by Bill Rose, also as a lead, with Charlie Katana, Scaff Elias, Mike Elliott, William Jockush, Beth Morsand, Mark Rosewater, and Henry Stern running out the development team. I'm curious your thoughts as someone who has been in a lead design and lead development capacity on a number of trading card games. What do you think that challenge looks like? Or what would your process be when you're talking about a set that is nothing but reprints?
So when you're dealing with a set that's nothing but reprints, usually there's other considerations also. You're not going to the trouble of just reprinting cards with no rhyme or reason. There's always other considerations. And I think those other considerations really can have a big impact on how you're going about this. If you're imagining a new format getting made, for instance, or if you are specifically trying to solve a problem, or in this case, if you're trying to usher in a new era of rules, and not even just the game rules, but the philosophy of how they're designing cards, because 6th edition marked a pivot in how they made black cards that had profound ripples for the rest of the game, the cards in the game. But generally speaking, I think you want to try to, when you're pulling these cards together, it's not the exact same as making a cube, and it's not the exact same as, it's certainly not the same as just sweet cards. I mean, there's things you want to do, like having a nice distribution of costs and effects, and ideally creating a texture where you're kind of, even if you're pulling, instruments from, different types of instruments, hopefully they're playing a song together. You're actually composing something. So I guess I would want to have a vision for what are we even making here? Like, what is it what's the song sound like?
I think something that I've noticed reviewing the core sets versus the expert level expansions, whatever you want to call them, around the same era, is there seems to be a greater emphasis on color pie definition in the core sets. There's an effort to communicate to, back then the hope was you would start at Portal and then move to a core set and then move to the expansions, right? Portal puts a big emphasis on the color pie being expressed at lower rarities. And like you said, there's sort of competing concerns once you're talking about a set that's legal in standard and all that comes along with that. But color pie definition at lower rarities, making sure that a new player who opens up a few packs can get a feel for what the colors do and don't do, also seems to be kind of a point of emphasis here.
Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of part of the texture that I speak to. It's not like necessarily just the whole theme of the set or something, but rather is what you're trying to convey. Here's what white does with creatures, or here's what white does in general. Green, for instance, in this set has no trample. So part of what they're doing with the color pie definition is trying to establish what is green in a game without trample, in a set without trample. And in retrospect, I think that was the complete wrong direction. I think trample's actually completely awesome and so much the right thing in so many ways. But still, the idea of what are you trying to convey to the players? It's interesting though, the contrast between, for new players, you want so much the commons and uncommons to be like, commons very frequently are like such a big part of that new player experience of what they're even seeing. Whereas the rares are so often helping dictate, at the time, dictating what the standard format would even look like. And then draft wasn't as big with core sets, but uncommons certainly seemed to be such an impactful thing for draft.
Absolutely. 6th edition was sold in a variety of ways. We have our standard 15 card booster packs with a rare, 3 uncommons, and 11 commons. We have the 75 card tournament packs with 3 rares, 10 uncommons, 32 commons, 30 basic lands, and a rule sheet. Now, we are going to be doing a crack-a-pack, as we always do with 6th edition. And I believe I've got these boosters right behind me. Spare me a moment.
Oh, we got two.
Want to show this up on the screen. Another little interesting tidbit here is I believe this is the first and perhaps only booster that has a piece of Magic art on it with that art not featured in the set. Very weird, right?
Like, this is not like Raging Goblin?
I don't think so. Maybe I could not find it. I went through the visual spoiler. I could not find it.
That is really surprising to me to think. I'm going to call in the dark. This is probably just like, I'm probably a fish, but I got to imagine that that's just not true.
All right. Well, we have our crack research team on it. So if it's wrong, it's them and not me.
Dude, it's just a crop, man.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Additionally, you have the 6th edition 2-player starter set, product you could purchase and play with your friend to hopefully learn how to play Magic, or at least a very stripped down version of it. The deck lists are not really super worth going through. Giant Spider, Drudge Skeleton, Terror, Enfeeblement. You sort of get the idea. Some nuts and bolts effects, and
some
hopefully
nice ones.
Yeah, some nice ones. 3 colors with atrocious mana, which is of course a big part of their starter products at the time. But yeah, this is just a pretty standard looking kind of 2-player introductory set. All cards or mostly cards that could appear in Portal, along with a little guide to kind of help you get through your first game or two. That brings us to the big part, the 6th edition rules changes. The release of 6th edition ushered in a new era of rules for Magic. The 6th edition rules change were meant to bring order to a disordered system and were a massive step forward in simplifying the game by introducing the stack, clarifying phases and steps, doing away with interrupts, and more. That brings us to the stack. Batches and series were removed in favor of the stack. Spells or abilities now went on the stack. A player could then pass another spell or ability or pass. If they passed, their opponents got priority to play spells and abilities. When they both passed in succession, the spell or ability on the stack resolved. Then the active player got priority again. Players didn't have to wait for everything on the stack to resolve before playing another spell. Mana sources were retired. Abilities that add mana to the mana pool, now called mana abilities, wouldn't go on the stack. The player simply would get that mana immediately. Spells that produced mana, however, such as Dark Ritual, went on the stack like other spells. Mana abilities could be played only when a player had priority or were asked to pay mana.
So there's kind of like a couple rules that you just bundled in there at once, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's the card type simplification of interrupts, instance, mana sources. There's the stack, like the whole first out in last, having multiple windows, instant window, interrupt window, instead just having the stack, and everything is the stack.
Mm-hmm.
And then this idea of mana abilities, not using the stack.
And going forward in the future a little bit, my understanding of history is that Umezawa's Jitte received a late change because one of the abilities was previously add a black mana, that you could remove a counter for that. And with 6th edition, that actually doesn't work in the rules anymore because you have 2 triggered abilities on the card, one that's generating mana and one that is not. And that was a reason why that card got redesigned into the final version somewhat late in the process. Piggybacking off of that, the end of interrupts. All interrupts now become instants, which meant that spells could be countered anytime before it resolved. Abilities that triggered on a spell being successfully cast now triggered on the spell being played.
So this one in particular, I think, is so good. I think that it was a little bit tricky at first for some people because they got really attached to the esoteric knowledge of, oh, I know how all these really fancy, like how it works, of when the trickery is and how I'm supposed to say things so that my cards will work at the right time and how I can make sure my opponents don't. And it wasn't like the best part of the game to have the skill be in. Additionally, Counterspell is stronger and Healing Salve and Giant Growth are weaker is like not a great thing. So like this difference of making cards like Healing Salve and Giant Growth have more meaning, that part's upside. But also, it really wasn't accomplishing anything having interrupts and instants be separate anyway, in part because some of the advantage of interrupts didn't even really work when they shipped alpha. Like, look at Power Sync. The rule, like Power Sync didn't really work right at the beginning. And there was a lot of stapling rules together to try to make different things happen. And once you add Dark Ritual is now a mana source, you're not making it less complicated or work better. You're actually adding even more burden that's going to,
Yeah, especially with Power Sync is a great example too, because it appears in the same set as Mana Short, which is an instant. And those 2 cards having wildly different timing and edge case rules when they're ostensibly trying to do roughly the same thing is not great. And trying to explain that to even a more experienced player, oftentimes I say new player, but like this is one where even if you were playing for 6 or 9 months, the nuances of all this stuff were kind of lost on you.
It's also awesome that Mana Short's the rare and Power Sync's the
yeah. That's the one you got to get in the new player's hands. All right. That moves us over to...
Although, is it worth paying any mention to some of the weird effects of this when they changed this rules, or when they changed the rules this way? Some of the cards got inadvertently changed and they had to just deal with the fallout. Like there's lots of interesting things that got changed as a result of, dealing with instance interrupts now being the same type of card, where like a card that countered instance now counters instance and interrupts, or anything that, those things getting merged together has power level implications. And then also just like you said, the triggers, things getting triggered on cast instead of resolving,
Mm-hmm.
That's another power level change that kind of,
Yeah, that's a huge one. I mean, if you look at just prowess, right? How different does that play in a world where you're looking on resolution rather than as a triggered ability?
The biggest thing, though, with both instance interrupts and the stack, where they converge, is the amount of wild tactics that could now exist. Instead of just, here's what I have, here's what you have, and then it all happens. The idea that we can have this, I do a thing, you do a thing, and then I pass, you pass, but now the context has changed, so I do a thing, you do a thing. Like that kind of, it didn't actually take up that much time of the game because it wouldn't be that relevant most of the time, but when it was relevant, wild tactics could emerge, and there was a lot of gamesmanship that had previously been a little bit starved.
And that's also a spot where if you don't identify it, it's not really harming your experience. It's kind of a value add on top, whereas the interrupt instant demarcation, that's something that you have to understand to be able to play the game at a level 1 setting.
Mm-hmm.
The damage prevention step was removed. Damage was no longer assigned and then successfully dealt. It was simply dealt. Damage prevention, regeneration, and other spells and abilities that generated replacement effects were now played just like other instants. When such a spell or ability resolved, it effect now created a shield. Damage prevention effects created shields that prevented the next damage the target would take. Regeneration's effect created a shield that replaced the permanent's next destruction with regeneration. These shields lasted until used up or until the next cleanup step. If an effect prevented a specific amount of damage, create a shield that lasted until the amount of damage was prevented. All damage prevention spells and abilities were now targeted. So yeah, damage prevention in the early days of Magic was an absolute mess, and regeneration was as well. And this is trying to me, it's kind of shades of the instant versus interrupt thing. Instead of having these particular carve outs for particular kinds of effects, everything kind of happens roughly in the same timing window.
Right. And even though this change makes Healing Solve worse, you could just cost the cards around whatever the rules are and just make them a stronger Healing Solve. It's not like Healing Solve was good in the first place, you know?
Yeah, that was something, a lot of conversation came up when you get ahead to the 10th edition rules update, or Magic 2010, and damage on the stack being removed, foreshadowing here a little bit. People talking about, well, Mog Fanatic's not good enough anymore. And it's like, well, you can just make Fanatical Firebrand. It's not like this is an impossible thing to solve. You want the rules to create a sound structure, and then you massage the card file around it. Defining triggered abilities. The 6th edition rules describe triggered abilities as any ability that began with when, whenever, or at. When a triggered ability's condition is met, the ability automatically goes on the stack. Its controller chooses all targets for it when it resolves and makes all other choices for it. If 2 or more triggered abilities go on the stack at the same time, those controlled by the active player go first. If one player chooses 2 or more, that player chooses their order. Triggered abilities can no longer resolve while another spell or ability is resolving. Phase abilities were all changed to trigger abilities that triggered when the specific phase or step began.
Yeah, I mean, that's not too crazy at all, you know. The biggest thing there is a little bit more rhyme or reason to when abilities are going on the stack and them all having to go on the stack.
Yeah, and instead, I mean, I remember from playing at the local shop back in the day, I don't know how much of this was actually true, but that kind of speaks to the problem of how does Ivory Tower and Black Vice resolve? And it's like, Ivory Tower goes first because life gain goes before damage. Again, I don't know if this was really the rules. This is what I was told, but it's a much simpler world in the one that's being described here.
So you don't even want to know about land tax.
I have played my share of land tax mirrors in the last 2 years to last a lifetime, but I believe you.
I just mean the rules used to change about how land tax even works.
Okay.
Like when does land tax go on the stack or not? The interaction with strip mine. You know, you used to be able to use strip mine and land tax together in a way that is totally preposterous, where you could have the same number of lands and then strip mine and land tax. Like that's before the strip mine resolves.
Not great.
That's it. Things were weird.
Yeah.
So
I could
good to clean things up a little bit.
Okay. So This also introduced the 5 phases and their steps. Each turn now had 5 phases: beginning, first main, combat, second main, and end. The beginning phase was now defined as to have 3 steps: untap, upkeep, and draw. No spells or abilities can be played during the untap step, and abilities that trigger during untap wait until the beginning of the upkeep step to go on the stack. Effects saying to do something at the beginning of the turn were specified to mean at the beginning of upkeep. Upkeep abilities were now triggered abilities.
City of Brass is in the set.
Yes.
So if you got to pay an upkeep, if you're not even it's weird trying to use mana abilities, but if you got, fortunately, most of the time the mana abilities are during the upkeep.
Mm-hmm.
But if you somehow end up taking some damage during the untap step, upkeeps when it would happen.
And not the last time that City of Brass is going to be coming up in this episode for a card that wildly changed in functionality due to the 6th edition update.
Yeah, the idea of this whole mana source thing, starting it off with City of Brass is an interesting interesting pairing.
Okay. There were now 2 main phases every turn. They were separated by combat, which was now its own phase. Phase abilities played at the beginning of or during the main phase were now triggered abilities that triggered at the beginning of the first main phase. Okay. Pretty much the same thing as the upkeep stuff. The end phase was defined as having 2 steps: end of turn and cleanup. The end of turn step worked just like the upkeep step. When it begins, all triggered abilities that start with at the end of turn go on the stack. When the cleanup step begins, the active player discards down to the maximum hand size. Then all damage on creatures is removed and effects that last until end of turn end. If any abilities trigger during the cleanup step, they go on the stack, and then the active player gets priority to play spells and abilities. If no abilities trigger, no one gets priority. If any spells or abilities resolve during cleanup, the whole step is repeated. Otherwise, the turn ends.
I always knew 20 years ago that someday I'd just be sitting around reading the 6th edition rules, like on camera. Like that's just, it's like Shakespeare. Really.
Yeah. So the place where I have seen this come up the most in a tournament setting is with, I don't even know if you would call it rules lawyering, but trying to lead someone down a bad road, which is I have 8 cards in my hand and I go move to discard and you go, okay, sure. And I discard and then you try to do something at the end of the turn, but we've passed that window because cleanup is basically supposed to be resolving the leftovers of the turn and getting the game cleaned up, not something that generates a priority window unless something particular happens.
Yeah. The amount of how do I word this thing that I don't actually want to end the turn yet, but I want to get out of the main phase, or I want you to be out of the main phase. There were weird metagames that,
Let me know when I can lightning bolt you.
Well, I don't know about all that. That's a very controversial subject at all points.
It is.
But it's also kind of nonsense. The idea of let me know when I can lightning bolt you. That's kind of like some give me your ATM number, your ATM pin. It's like, no, give me your ATM pin.
For those of you newer to the show who might know this reference, there was a time where there was an interpretation of Magic's rules that
not by the judges.
Let me know if I can lightning bolt. Let me know when I can lightning bolt you. You just ask your opponent in the dark. And of course, your opponent wants you to just fire off this random lightning bolt for no reason. So your opponent goes, yeah, sure, you can do it right now.
That wasn't a thing that you could really do. That was a attempt there were some people who were trying to figure out what they could say to be obtuse, what they could say to try to get the other person to agree to not do anything. It was kind of weird, but.
Yeah, and in hope that, they say, okay, and then you go, okay, I pass priority, and you've moved them through some critical phase. Magic.
The epitome of attempting to rules lawyer.
That brings us to everyone's favorite phase, I hope, combat phase. Combat was now its own phase with 5 steps. Beginning of combat, declare attackers, declare blockers, combat damage, and end of combat. Spells and abilities could be played during each of these steps, but only after the steps' mandatory parts had been completed. The declare attackers and declare blockers steps were unchanged, but dealing combat damage now worked differently. The active player announced how he or she wants attacking creatures' combat damage to be dealt. Then the defending player does the same for blocking creatures. Tapped blockers now deal combat damage just like untapped ones. Because there is no damage prevention step in these rules, the combat damage isn't dealt immediately. Instead, it goes on the stack. Players may then play spells and abilities as usual. Nothing that happens to the attacking and blocking creatures can affect damage that is on the stack waiting to be dealt. When the stack reaches the combat damage, it is dealt according to earlier damage announcements, even if one or more of the creatures in combat are no longer in play. This enabled the damage on the stack plays, which was removed in the M10 rules changes.
Dude, I know that there were some tactics that disappeared because of this whole not being able to tap blockers, but in general, I think it really helped streamline and clean up the rules.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was this sweet period of taking some really bad commons in draft that just tap a creature and like draw a card, or even just tap a creature at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like trying to like make that a thing. But there's other cards you can do, and it's pretty lame to have Icy Manipulator work that way instead of, like it's already sweet just tapping whatever I want.
Right. Tap your blocker before
the
blocks.
Implication, like the idea of I'm not going to tap anything because of the implication that I could tap something so you can't do anything. Unnecessarily complicated and burdensome.
All right, so damage on the stack. A game designer many years ago once told me, and in fact, it might have been you, I don't remember the source of this quote originally, that damage on the stack is a really good rule system if you assume the game is played by robots. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you mean really good rule system compared to what? Because like, I think that 6th edition was an improvement, and I think getting rid of damage on the stack is an improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So, was it good? Sure. It was also good to get rid of.
Talk about also, to your point about the pre 6th edition rules, where knowing the particulars of it was, now, of course, this was a comprehensive rule set rather than one-off rules on individual cards or suites of cards. But people got quite a few stories about this. I'm curious your early experience with, because I'm sure you understood the implication of this better than most of the people in your local area.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of free wins early on from the transition of people having to figure out the tricks.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't particularly feel to me like it was that like look how clever I am, because pretty quickly it's the same trick ever, like it's the same wording, the same phrase, the same, like you got to be pretty mediocre to keep convincing yourself you're clever from just repeating the same couple tactics for a long time. It seems clever at first, but if you engage with it in a consistent way, it's not very satisfying for the person who actually wants to have ideas,
So to make it a little less jargony, I kind of want to walk through what this means in practical terms. So damage goes on the stack means let's imagine I attack with a 3/3. Patrick over here blocks with a 3/3. I pass, Patrick passes. Now damage goes on the stack, meaning that number that we're dealing to each other is locked in. My creature is dealing 3 to his creature is then dealing 3 to mine.
It's almost like a lightning bolt got made of sorts. That much damage is its own little thing. Then
there's a priority window for each of us to do something. And then we can have a stack and we can have a battle over stuff, whatever. And then when the dust clears, Patrick's creature has taken 3 and so has mine. And maybe that's enough to kill them, maybe not, depending on what's gone on what's happened after damage has gone on the stack. To your point about the tactics being repeated, what happens in this world is I attack with a 3/3 and Patrick blocks with his 3/3. And I've got a giant growth in my hand and Patrick has 2 mana open. And if you play Magic nowadays, now you got to think about, well, do I want a giant growth here and risk getting blown out by whatever he's got with his 2 mana? Or do I want to hold my giant growth back? Do I want to pass back to you because I assume that you have a +2/+2 in your hand? I could bait that out of you and then go over the top with the giant growth. That's sort of the tactical stuff that's being described here. And with damage on the stack, so often the answer, like over 99% of the time in that specific scenario is I put damage on the stack, then I cast Giant Growth to save my creature. And then, regardless of whether or not Chapin has a trick in that spot, I'm at least dealing 3 to his creature no matter what. There's so little incentive for me to play the Giant Growth before combat damage.
Yeah, and various other tricks like that are the same algorithm every time, where it's like, okay, you just memorize what is the algorithm instead of making some decision.
And yeah, I think that people learned the trick when people were talking about the game being less skill intensive when they got rid of this rule. Some really smart people said it. I very, very strongly disagreed, because memorizing put damage on the stack, sacrifice my Mog Fanatic to deal 1 to your 1/1 outside of combat, very different than I have to decide what I'm going to be doing before, and I can actually lose the opportunity if you pass back at me.
Yeah, it's like there's only so much. It's like there's X amount of skill in the game, and there's only 100% available. And where is that skill coming from is an interesting question. And then there's also this question of how impactful it is, right? Like because it is possible to take some skill out and instead of other skills filling the void, make it more coin flippy. Whereas other times you can take the skill out and the new skills that now are relevant are more satisfying. Like, for instance, in League of Legends, there were some people who were frustrated many years ago when they added a dragon timer, because it was like one of the skills is somebody just keeping track manually of how long it's been since the dragon spawned. And then they're getting rid of that skill by just having a timer. But the thing is, everybody already has access to like clocks and phones and watches, and making the skill be somebody's adding this extra step. That wasn't like a very fun thing. That if there's only 100% victory to come from, having that be the skill that is being rewarded isn't as satisfying as, how you actually fight at the dragon.
Right. And or you can look at sports, like it is skillful to have the basketball in a triple threat position and swing your arms up in such a way that even if the defender isn't in your space, they slap your arm. That's hard to do. There's a reason not that many people were able to do it, even when it was permissible, but it does offer the question, is this the skill we want to be testing?
Right.
Other updates. You now lost the game as soon as you reach 0 life, not at the end of the phase. This actually sounds like it would be corner case a little bit. It was not. Cards like Vampiric Tutor and City of Brass alongside Mirror Universe were a very easy level 1 exploit for this, along with some, certain Necropotent style combo decks where whatever, et cetera, et cetera.
Dude, it's so wild that a Dark Heart Waste and City of Brass work differently.
And
in the same set.
Well, they're teaching you the new rules.
Moment.
They're teaching you the new rules.
It is a teaching moment.
Artifact ability is no longer shut off while the artifact was tapped, sort of analogous to the tapping blockers sort of thing.
And then they just power level errata a few artifacts where they're like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Icy Manipulator, Winter Orb, it just has to work, man.
Right, exactly. And you now chose modes and targets for a spell or ability and pay cost when you play it, but you make all other choices when the spell or ability resolves, not when it's played. You can identify multiple spells and abilities by the choose one phrase. So this is something like give target creature +3/+3 and put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control as a theoretical card, instead of having to pick everything up front. The thing resolves, and then any choice that you get to make is part of you sort of cleaning up the resolution of the spell. So that does it for the rules updates. These are massive. For the most part, I think that most of this falls into a good house cleaning kind of mode of let's get everything to kind of broadly function the same way and go from there. Damage on the stack is the one big outlier to that.
So I give an example of why damage on the stack was a problem in some ways, and there was a lot of strangeness that fell out of it. Wizard Mentor, a common in Urza Saga, was 2 and a blue for a 2/2 that its ability is you tap it to return it and another one of your creatures to your hand. And the original version of Wizard Mentor, the way that it was printed, it's like, oh, it's kind of cool with the next set with Urza's Legacy of bouncing your cards that have enters the battlefield ability, enters abilities, and not even having to pay the echo or something. But there's cool tricks you can do there. And then in theory, if you have Wizard Mentor out, it could, it just enables, you could get rid of enchantments like a -2/-2 enchantment on your
a cessation or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things you could do, a lot of interesting tactics. And in theory, you can Wizard Mentor to mess up your opponent's ability to play a certain types of removal spells. Like in practice, it was a clunky card that slowed you down a lot. So it gave you a lot of decisions that you could potentially do, but it wasn't exactly OP. It was not very aggressively costed.
Mm-hmm.
Once damage was on the stack, the whole nature of the card changed in a way that was very, it wasn't great. When you had Wizard Mentor, you could just be like, okay, Wizard Mentor and my other creature are both going to block, and I'm going to put damage on the stack, and then I'm going to return them to my hand. So their damage would still happen, and then your creatures wouldn't die because they wouldn't be around when the damage resolved.
Mm-hmm.
So it changed Wizard Mentor into this unbelievable, even though it's a common, it just made attacking and blocking no longer even like reasonable in any kind of capacity.
And there's a lot of the functional, like what actually falls out of damage on the stack is exactly the type of thing that you're describing, where it doesn't make sense for players to really ever risk things or put their stuff in harm's way, because the out of stack damage and then giant growth, stack damage and then prevent damage, et cetera, the sum of the rules is, even setting aside the individual designs like you're calling out, which is, like you said, that's sort of an egregious change to power level and play pattern at a baseline. But it's
emblematic of what it does to the cards.
Yes. But yeah, I think that rules change still feels to me like an effort to sort of, again, codify, get everything to sort of work in this notion of triggers and priority passes. But I think it's a bit of a whiff in the way the other stuff isn't.
Yeah, I mean, it worked better than the previous in many ways, but definitely damage on the stack was the one that was the most jarring. And definitely glad that we've moved on from that. But at the same time, I think erring on the side of trying to make trying to condense everything as much as you can, even if like they went a little bit too far. I think that was a good direction to go, to try to tie everything together and to make it more cohesive.
Next up, the mechanics, 6th edition. Welcome back to the 6th edition episode of Resleevables. We are in the mechanics section. There are none. The end. No new mechanics, just all reprints. Nothing to talk about. Stay tuned. Up next is Cycles, brought to you by BoshNRoll. BoshNRoll, aka Brian Coval, one of Magic's top streamers. You can find him streaming on YouTube Monday through Friday. Vintage, Legacy, you name it. If you're trying to get better at Eternal or just watch some entertaining Magic, you can't do any better than BoshNRoll. I've seen him win, I think, 2 Black Lotuses in the last 15 months in these various Eternal events. So if you're going to bother, go through the hassle of getting these expensive cards and show up to these events, you might as well give it your best shot. Wildly entertaining. One of the favorite streamers of this channel. Again, you can subscribe over at the YouTube page, BoshNRoll. All right, Cycles. We have a few. Pretty simple and straightforward. We have these allied colored pain lands. Each of these lands can tap for a colorless mana or 1 of 2 allied colors of mana in exchange for the land dealing damage to you. Out of card Waste Underground Sea, Sulphurous Springs, Rushland, and Conclusion Forest.
And in this set, there's also the context of City of Brass being the soft 6th honorary member of the cycle.
How do you feel about these duels as being kind of baseline standard level duel lands?
So I didn't love it, in part because 5th edition already had these. But 4th edition not having good duels, and 5th edition having just like when there's just pain lands, and 6th edition just having the pain lands again also. The pain lands are not the most fun baseline thing to exist. I think there was a little bit too much of an emphasis on balance, and I think that it took them a while to figure out how to even make dual lands, because if you look at the first many years of Magic, they were really other than the original dual lands, they were really afraid to pull the trigger on playable dual lands. You know, the idea that a Dark Waste and Underground River are the good ones is so wild.
Shout out Lava Tubes right over your shoulder there.
Dude, the depletion lands, the idea that the Tempest pain lands come into play tapped, the idea that you have to just keep making this kind of stuff. It took them so long to even just make tap dual lands.
The fact that this block of Urza's Saga does not have a dual land of any sort.
Dude, my first cube or custom set that I was playing with Garfield and Morrow and all them way back in the early 90s, I had tap duels.
Sick.
So sick.
Like Coastal Tower and that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. That's it. It was, they didn't have the basic land types. It was just literally, you know, tap for a blue or white, comes into play tapped. You know?
Yeah. Awesome. We have the Fallen Empire Sacrifice lands, a cycle that I am personally very fond of. Uncommon lands that enter the battlefield tapped and can be tapped for 1 of its color of mana or sacrificed for 2. Runes of Trocaire, Sylvan Knight Temple, Ebon Stronghold, Havenwood Battlegrounds, and my favorite piece of Magic artwork, Dwarven Ruins, which I was fortunate enough recently to win at auction. Heritage, get it to me. We're trying to get this thing up in the studio, and you're dragging your feet a little bit. I understand we're around the holidays right now, but get me my Dwarven Ruins.
I mean, remember, this has Armageddon and Yakalhops in it.
It was these lands, this was pre 6th edition, but one of my first competitive decks as a like local player or whatever was some sort of Armageddon Yakalhops deck with Runes of Trocaire and Dwarven Ruins. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously there, the synergy, getting 2 mana out of 1 land means 1 less land of your own that's getting destroyed by your global land destruction spell like Armageddon or Yakalhops.
Even I was able to figure that one out. It was awesome. A little bit of a balance challenge when you have a critical mass of these. They would go on to pair with the invasion lands of the same sort. They're a little bit different. They tap for A and then sack for B, C. But a standard format with 10 of those floating around can end up in a problematic space. And that certainly happened with these.
I do personally, if you're going to do these kind of things, I personally like it when the sack ability is more different than just extra mana, than just +1 mana. Making them all into just like glorified Crystal Vein bonus mana things compared to at least the invasion ones by giving you splash colors. It's very dynamic because sometimes you don't even really need the extra mana. You just want the colors. Yeah. And that's cool. You know, particularly for stuff like when you're kicking some card that has, you know, it's not even your color of kicker, but you just happen to have this 1 land that gives you this 3rd color on, you know, incidentally.
Yeah. I mean, there was some amount of, you know, I actually backdoor kickered my Urza's Rage because I just had the right constellation of the invasion ones. Don't really get that experience here.
But as far as mana accelerators go, I do generally really prefer mana accelerator. Like I like when there's options for people to invest something now and then at a later turn potentially be able to get ahead. I think that that's just so different than the world of, you know, Dark Ritual or Lotus Petal.
Or Crystal Vein, City of Traders, Ancient Tomb.
Too,
yeah.
Like the idea that I'm investing it now for the option later, that's, you know, that mana acceleration is just different when it's an investment, you know?
Yeah. And these I actually like even more than, let's say Hickory Woodlock, for example, because that's really just the thing that you're getting. It's really, really extreme.
Instead of just the option. Yeah.
This is you're paying for just the option, which is very sweet. Still probably not something you want standard to be balanced around.
Most of the time anyway.
But I have a soft spot for these.
Yeah, I like it. It's fine.
Yes. Yeah. For the sensibilities of the time.
I like it.
All right. That brings us to our next cycle. The industry standard has to appear in every core set, has to appear at the beginning of most of the set ones of the blocks that we reviewed. Circles of Protection. Each of these common white enchantments has a mana cost of white and a colorless and the ability to prevent damage from a source of a given color for 1. Notably, did not reprint COP artifacts or COP shadow.
Or COP land.
Yeah. Cop, white, blue, black, red, green.
Rune land, I guess.
These are rancid. And then we're still not out from under them.
It's I don't know. They're a holdover from a different era, a different philosophy. I think that the idea of Magic being balanced around cards that are changing the rules, that are like more like Alpha, for instance, was much more enchantment based with regards to, in theory, I've got this card that could completely change everything. And there is some coolness to that. But the amount of completely change everything that translates into paralysis, because at the end of the day, Stasis, Winter Orb, and Legends continue this trajectory. But whether it's Island Sanctuary or Moat or the Abyss or Nether Void, the idea of Arborea, Land Equilibrium, the idea of there's so many cards that make it so that you can't play Magic.
Right.
And the idea that there are 5 commons, even if there were uncommons, it's still a problem. But the idea that there's all these cards that don't do anything except suppress everything. I mean, and I get that it's like, oh, you could just play 2 colors. But that in practice, this idea of every turn, I'm going to pay this, so that stop, that stop, that stop, that stop. That is such a contributor to slowing the game down and highly repetitive actions that are not the most satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, there's the one case where I think people get hung up on this just locks someone, and that's not great. But I think there's the second case of, well, I can maybe get my way out of this, or maybe my opponent will miss some land drops, or maybe they'll leave up 1 mana a turn to protect themselves from a fireball. And so I'm at least chipping in a little bit, where that game is also really not fun to play, even if it isn't the full lockout.
And actually, all things considered, I could be a lot more sympathetic to the idea of there's literally Circle Protection Red and it's the uncommon color hoser.
Sure.
If you're living in a world where you want to have these color hosers, I think it's totally fine. If you're going to have some, you have to put them at whatever power level they're going to be, but it's not like COP Red is actually more egregious than Boil.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? If you want to have COP Red, fine. But the notion of how cool, there is an experience, which is the realization that even though these cards all look the same, Circle of Protection Red is so good, and Circle Protection Black can be pretty decent, and Circle Protection White is so bad, and Circle Protection Blue is heinous. The idea, I get that that's a thing you could do. I just argue that was a thing that you could do in Alpha, and that by the time you get to Revised, the joke's not even that funny anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly, 4th edition and 5th edition and 6th edition, having to just have so many white cards that are all terrible, or that are just, it's boring and repetitive. And even when it's interesting, it's not that interesting.
Yeah.
And it could be you get into some real esoteric lines that I think you could also accomplish by having one of them. I think that the fun of first of all, I'm dubious on the amount of fun of, we need to have all of these cards to support that there's 1 rare in the set that's Sleight of Mind or something, right? or there's 1 magical hack and 1 Sleight of Mind, instead of just literally put those on the same card, right? Because man, magical hack and Sleight of Mind being 1 card would have been so much better. But anyway, yeah, I think that fun is also there when it's Circle Protection Red,
right? Yeah, all right.
And it's uncommon.
We got mana diamonds. Each diamond artifact costs 2, enters the battlefield tapped. These from Mirage. We have Marble Diamond, Sky Diamond, Charcoal Diamond, Fire Diamond, and Moss Diamond.
I absolutely loved these. I think that you got to remember, in context, there was a reaction to the Moxes in the original set, just like there was a reaction to the blue power cards like Ancestral Recall. There was a period where they tried to clean up the game in Revised by removing most of the artifact mana and removing most of the card draw. They didn't remove all of it, And man, 4th edition sure tried to finish the job. But like, they didn't know for sure where is the right level for this stuff. There was this reaction of, oh, artifact mana and card draw is broken. But in reality, it's not that artifact mana and card draw is broken. It's that the Moxes and Ancestral Recall are broken. Mm-hmm. The diamonds are, obviously, they're far more modest than we see now, and it didn't even take that long. Really, the diamonds could have been shipped without having to be tapped in the first place. But I will tell you that that left a lot of space for a lot more better cards to get made later, and those cards were beloved. And it wasn't just a trap or a trick. They got played way too much. They got played in draft when they shouldn't have. They didn't get played in draft when they should have. It went both ways. It was very interesting. It added an element of interaction. It's another one of those, you're investing now, but you're getting some acceleration later. Mm-hmm. There's so much to like about it. And I think that the fact that they ended up on the slightly low side and yet were also very impactful to many many formats, leaving a lot more room. I think that it ended up in a sweet spot.
Yeah, I think Enters the Battlefield tapped is so critical here, and it's what is absent from the most powerful artifact experiences in Magic, going back to the original Moxes to nowadays with Amber and Opal and all that kind of stuff, of just what the ceiling is on your level of acceleration, especially on turn 1, where your opponent hasn't even had a window to interact, and here's just a heap of this stuff. And set aside 2 cost, the fact that these are entering the battlefield tap means it's so hard to ever produce something like that. It's much more about, I'm trying to jump to 4 or to 5 or to 6, and not about, I'm trying to play a million things on the first 2 turns.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I don't think it's splitting hairs to point out the difference of Sky Diamond versus a Talisman of Dominance. Mm-hmm. When you have the ability to play your artifact here, and then it's also untapped, you are still investing a mana, and sometimes 2 if you don't have a good way to use it. But the idea that you have all these interaction cards that cost 1, so you can use your 2-drop to play this thing and still make a play. It's cool that exists in powered formats. It's kind of nice if that's not the floor.
Yeah.
And so I love the floor involving total investment. I'm just making the risks.
Yeah, I played 8 of these in my States deck when Invasion had just come out. Red-black control with 4 fire, 4 charcoal.
Love it.
Tectonic break from Mercadian Masks. And if you set it up right, even if you tech braked yourself, you got all these diamonds laying around, you can still get your Pirate Zombie back. You can still go to town with Blazing Spectre. All the hits. So, 8 was a lot. The right number was probably 0, but I did have fun with my 8 diamonds.
There was a lot of times where the right number was between 3 and 6. Usually the only time 8 was even like really a consideration. There were a lot of Armageddon decks where 8 is like very reasonable.
Yeah.
Something I really loved about the coming to play taps, by the way, was that in context, the only artifact acceleration really, because like mana batteries, mm-hmm. It's not really acceleration the same way when it's on turn 4, but the only like legit artifact acceleration we were seeing early on, that's even like close to this kind of stuff was Mindstone and Fellwar Stone.
Yeah.
And Mindstone came a little bit later, actually just later in this block, but the difference of Fellwar Stone versus Fire Diamond, when Fire Diamond is actually reliable and Fellwar Stone might not make your color, mm-hmm. and it might not even make anything if they don't have a land yet.
Yeah.
I like that in context. I also love how many opponents of mine played with things like 4 charcoal diamonds and 4 fire diamonds in their mediocre red-black decks.
It was investment city. You had Urborg Volcano, 8 diamonds. Pyre Zombie is a really slow way to do it. It's if you like investment as a game concept, as a thing that's healthy, man, you would have loved my States deck.
Dude, I Uktabi Orangutanged so many diamonds. So many diamonds.
Last cycle of the set here, Beloved, back from Alpha, we have the Lucky Charms. These are 1-mana artifacts that you can pay a mana whenever either player pays a spell of a particular color to gain 1 life. Ivory Cup, Crystal Rod, Throne of Bone, Iron Star, Wind Sphere?
I'm way warmer on these than I am the COPs.
No,
They're awesome.
These are awesome.
For terrible cards, I think that it's very telling how beloved these cards are for how unbelievably heinous they are.
They're really
so
rad.
bad. And I think the difference between proactively gaining life versus just damage suppression at the spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the nature of keying off my thing instead of stopping your thing. And I think the idea of the stackable nature and the game goes on, and how even if you keep losing with these cards, they can seem like they did so much good for you.
Yeah.
There's so much I love about these. And I think that it's still for the best. I mean, the game is advanced to a degree, and certainly the power level, where they wouldn't really be appropriate anymore. But I think in context, chef's kiss.
These are
and they're not common.
And talk about, to your point of like, you keep losing, but these things feel like they're doing so much. Something that these cards also do, again, at a very low power level, at a very new player kind of level. Wow, does it make your draw step that much more exciting?
Oh yeah.
When you are on the ropes and you top deck Gray Ogre, but it's Gray Ogre with 2 life
Bonus
attached to it. It
adding
feels
kicker to
so,
everything.
Feels so different.
I also like that it's spread out across 5 colors. I think that 5 artifacts that work for each of the different colors is so different than 5 cards in 1 color.
Yes.
That stop the,
That does it for Cycles. We'll be back momentarily with the trivia of 6th edition. Welcome back. Here comes the trivia section for 6th edition. The top bullet point here from our crack research team says random trivia. 6th edition was the first core set not to have the mirror pair of Holy Strength and Unholy Strength. The pair returned in 7th edition and was in every core set until Magic 2012. These rule. I would advocate for keeping them in. Curious what your thoughts would be for cutting them.
They wanted to make a different one. You got to remember, this is during a period where they were dealing with the fallout of demon. There was a period where they actually cut all the demons.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even just that they took Unholy Strength, got rid of the pentagram in the background. They also wanted to not have Unholy be so loud front and center.
Yeah.
So just from a brand positioning, I think that was kind of the part of the impetus. But also, you can do better than Unholy Strength and Holy Strength. And I think that it's okay to experiment with having different mods like this. And in particular, I'm sympathetic to, and I don't know if this was even like part of their consideration, but I'm sympathetic to when you're doing 6th edition, changing, wanting, like, perhaps that's not the set where you most want to make it about aura, about enchant creature or whatever.
Sure. That brings us to changes. So there's a number of cards that appear in 6th edition that were not in 5th edition, either because they were cut or because they were printed post 5th edition and then they were reprinted in 6th edition. Some standouts include Boil, Chill, Perish, everyone's favorite, Mystical Tutor, Worldly Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Marrow, Hammer of Bogarden, Final Fortune, Shock, Stormcrow,
Diminishing Returns, Desertion. These are some sweet cards.
Yeah, Doomsday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, some
so many bangers. That's one of the things that I just absolutely loved about 6th edition was this is an attractive set.
Yes.
There's so many cards on it that were, even the cards that weren't like pushing the envelope of power level, were very fun to play with in a like feel powerful. Like Desertion. Desertion is really powerful regardless of how often it wins,
Yes. Yeah, Diminishing Returns. That's another great example of that.
That one, dude, I won half my, when I first won all my Moxes and Ancestral Walk and all that, I started out winning with Nether Void and such like that before I had power. But once Alliances dropped, I played Fast Spawn, Diminishing Returns with 4 Lightning Bolt, 4 Chain Lightning, 4 Black of Ice, and just started, that's when I just started cleaning up, where I just was like, dude, that's literally the moment where I was like, I could be a professional Magic player for real. When there was no professional Magic players back then.
You describing that deck literally activated my palate. I could feel like just something so sumptuous. thinking about all that.
Oh, dude, it was nice. 4 strip mine, 4 fast bond, 4 diminishing returns, 4 lightning bolt for chain lightning, 4 incinerate, 4 black vice. Like, you're just going to town, and then random stuff like ancestral.
Sure,
wheel,
whatever. Yeah,
time twister.
You got to have a little bit of the tryhards in there, but that's so sweet.
Oh, dude, that was a deck. The amount of the deck people that I would just tilt.
And obviously
everybody's got a plan until they take a black vice to the face.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. You have Soul Ring in that one?
Oh yeah. You got a diminishing returns. Yeah. You know, Soul Ring wasn't that great, but at the end of the day, it really does matter sometimes when you're just dropping multiple vices and you want a diminishing returns.
Yeah, sets up that turn 1 of double vice, turn 2 returns.
Yeah. Plus, at the end of the day, when you're playing fast spawn and Soul Ring, the amount of other people who are like, "Oh, what? You're so dumb. You're so bad."
Obviously, this also cuts in the other direction. There were cards in 5th edition that did not make the cut into 6th.
One in particular.
And I do think there is a little bit of a through line here of you talking about the set feeling powerful, and a lot of the cuts here being things that don't feel powerful or are obviously way too powerful.
Well, I'll tell you the one, but I mean, let's see if you can get. What is the one that is the most defining change between 5th and 6th regarding the powerful rares?
Mana Vault?
So actually, that's powerful, but no, I think the defining one is Necropotence.
Okay.
There was this period of time where Magic R&D was obsessed with Necropotence. And I get it. Necropotence is a sweet card, sweet design. It's kind of implemented pretty clunky and awkward, but it's very telling that there have been 27 attempts to make a fixed Necropotence, and at the end of the day, the funny thing is that Necropotence is an attempt to make a fixed Lich. But Necropotence was seen as being so iconic, so emblematic of the color pie, so good for Magic in so many ways that they were able to blind themselves to the problems with Necropotence. And I get, like, Necropotence is a very interesting card. There's a lot of fun and power. It is too much in many ways, and it's got a lot of problems. But what is particularly memorable at the time was how much there was this belief of, we need Necropotence to, they literally said this, Necropotence should always be legal. And then they're just going to cost all of the black cards around Necropotence.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, that is so perverse of a perspective on the game. It's not like you actually want every black deck to be a Necro deck. And so there was a regionals that I played a Necro deck when everybody thought Necro's dead this time for real, because they had just made all of the black cards for like 2 years so bad that work well with Necropotence. Yeah. And then Necropotence is legal. So you could have Dark Ritual, you could have Necropotence, and then every card's terrible. So I'm just Dark Ritualing out Abyssal Spectre, or Dark Ritual, the Serrated Arrows, and
Vampire Bats, whatever.
Black Knight, burn for 1, go, and it was, and I love Necropotence, but I think that the idea that you're going to cost every single card in the color around it, instead of, dude, ban that card and make a fixed Necro if you really want, or maybe, I don't know, make 10 different Necros so that it's not always the same thing. 6th edition doesn't have Necropotence, which is part of why it was able to usher in this new era of black cards are allowed to be good again.
Yep. And there's some of the cuts here, I would say Winter Orb and Stasis, you can kind of connect the dots there. That joke got a little bit old. You had Sylvan
It's amazing that that's how long it took.
Yes. Sylvan Library. I think it's a little color pie bizarre. Probably not.
Well, all the rules also, you got to understand, the rules really didn't work well for Sylvan Library back then. There were these strange things like Pursuit of Knowledge. If you used Pursuit of Knowledge with Sylvan Library, you could do this weird exploit that made you draw 7 cards. Mm-hmm. There's lots of weird trickery with Sylvan Library that's cool to exist in the game's lore, but isn't what you want in a core set.
Abundance. That's another one with a
Sylvan Library. Yep.
Yeah, some chicanery there.
Once you're dealing with, you see, this is how the replacement effects play out. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a match I won at PTQ where my opponent had Sylvan Library Abundance.
That's dope.
And they went to do the thing. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I know what they're doing. And I'm like, what are you doing? And they just like kind of point to cards. And I go, no, literally, what are you doing? And then it's just like, okay, I'll just library it, just whatever, But I knew what they were doing.
What they were aspiring to do anyway.
Yeah, what they were trying to do is trigger Sullivan Library and then use Abundance Replacement Effect.
Which then would make it so they wouldn't have to put any cards back. They would just get 3 activations of Abundance.
Yes, so you have selection, so you can go like spell, land, and because you didn't draw them that way, which is sort of the key phrase on Sylvan Library, then you're just doing it. But
that's cool.
You got to actually know what you're doing to do it. It is cool. Also, a couple notable cuts here include Force Spike and Brainstorm, probably for the better.
I don't know, man. I think Brainstorm would have been good to stay.
Okay.
What's the problem with Brainstorm in 6th edition?
No, I don't think there's like an obvious identifiable risk.
Like
maybe Mystical Tutor and Vamp Tutor is the risk.
And I'm sympathetic to, in context, you have this you've already done Brainstorm and you want to just add some other stuff, so maybe there's a different cantrip you'd want to do, but and maybe it actually worked out for the best anyway because of Urza Block. But one, they didn't know when they were making this, they didn't know how Urza Block was going to play out, and 2, Brainstorm's definitely way doper than most of the other Brainstorms. So I don't know, I would have liked the game to have a little bit more Brainstorm. I would have liked the trajectory of that kind of. I used to always, in every one of my custom sets, I'd have just draw 2, put 1 back. The mini, 2/3 of a Brainstorm.
Yep.
But anyway, it's fine to cut. I
think it's tough with the tutors. I think even if you,
but that's just not how it really played out. It's so good. I think that it's good with the tutors to interact that way. Like, I think the idea of getting a little extra mileage out of your Mystical Tutor or your Vampiric Tutor is very different than getting a little extra mileage out of your Land Tax or your Thawing Glacier.
Sure.
When you're getting it without the opportunity cost, it's so different. When it's a tactical thing where you're just like Brainstorm and comboing it with one other one-shot card to get this one time, that's peanut butter and chocolate, where it's more than the sum of the parts.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the idea of you can do it either way, like you can Mystical Tutor and then access the card immediately with Brainstorm. That's also awesome. The idea you could play both of these cards in both orders are good and synergistic.
In very different ways.
That is, I think, as far as that kind of stuff goes, I actually think that's actually on the good side. But
we have 20 rarity shifts. A lot of these involve cards that were uncommons or rares in Portal that have been moved down to lower rarities. You're going to see a lot of this over this kind of period of time where the rarity sensibilities on Portal versus 6th edition versus Mercadian Masks are going to be very different. And so you're going to see things like Dry Spell moved to common, Coercion, Mountain Goat. We have a couple instances.
Well, Mountain Goat was common in Ice Age.
Yes. Well, uncommon in Portal, and then
I see. So
at the most recent printing.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the type of thing where, land walking actually doesn't play that well. You probably don't want the Portal experience saturated with it.
I don't know. I mean, it's not the greatest, but it's not the worst. I think the Garfield was actually spot on regarding the goals of Landwalk and why it's good for new players. Like the idea of giving them a way to, here are the creatures that can attack for free.
Mm-hmm.
These creatures are safe unless some trickery is happening. I actually think as far as evasion goes, that's easier to grok. You don't necessarily want to have a ton of it. So it's kind of nice if it's not just like, I'm sympathetic to it being uncommon because you just don't want there to be that many Landwalkers. But I really like Landwalk as a, basic Landwalk as a sometimes thing for new players. Insofar as you're ever going to have Landwalk, because it's not the greatest mechanic.
Yeah, definitely on 1/1s for 1/2. So, because there is the feeling of there's a lot of ways for me to work around this, even if I can't directly kill or block with it.
Also, it's so dope putting Unholy Strength on or whatever. Like when you put Fire Breathing on a Mountain Goat, you're actually doing something.
Yeah.
Shout out to the Mountain Goat.
Interestingly enough, Summer Bloom got shifted down to uncommon.
Yeah,
sure. Why not? It took a little while for this one to really, this is a large card file kind of card. Not something that's going to be ruinous in a standard level set a huge portion of the time. Power Sync was a common. in Saga and moved up to uncommon, which I think is probably an appropriate thing to do when you're bundling all the rules changes that like Power Sync specifically interlocks with in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I just don't believe you need Power Sync in the core set.
Why?
It's too interesting. It's very interesting, but it's too interesting.
It is really interesting.
Yeah.
All right. That moves us on to notable cards.
Dude, why don't they make a rare Power Sync now that's like price to move? That's like a tactical, real interesting. I don't mean like a syncopate. I mean like an actual like tap them out where you actually get into the weird kind of like an X blue Power Sync that also does whatever that, you know.
Yeah, sure.
And not cheating with some kind of like logic knot type stuff either.
No, the actual like you got
to really do it, but part of what you're doing is power syncing them and tapping them out and draining their mana pool.
Yeah.
And then just put it on a rare or a mythic that does some stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Like Power Sync and the mana you drain out of them, you brain guys yourself or something. I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, that's sweet. It's just not really a low rarity.
No.
Nuts and bolts. No. This is all it does kind of design. All right. In white, we have Armageddon card we have discussed at length over the course of the series so far. Another card they just can't live without.
I love Armageddon personally. I realize this is not the most popular opinion, and I think that its power level is a little strong.
Well, 2/3 of the hosts of the Resleevables feel this way. So you're as far as it goes, you're in very friendly territory to state this opinion.
I think that Armageddon, like regardless of all that, there's this other thing of where, like, what should cost 4 versus 5 or single white or whatever. There's all that kind of power level stuff. But I think that Armageddon is a perfect example of the type of card that can make the games where you play it might feel unfun to some degree at a disproportionate amount, particularly if you weren't preparing for this. But the games in general are more fun because this exists. And I think that it can go too far easily, especially a card like when it's as strong as Armageddon. But the idea that there are other things the other person might do that could greatly impact you is very big. Like the idea that that it matters what your opponent is playing with, and that you should play your cards different because of how they might play. And the idea of, well, I don't know that I actually want to play my 6th or 7th or 8th land. Or the idea of my 6th, 7th, and 8th land are still good. Or the idea of my single 4/5 creature is like really powerful for holding off his cards long enough for me to draw enough land to start doing things again. Or the idea of there's still hope for my fast deck even when things go later, that we can like change what state the game is at. And it's a big swing. It's very volatile. It's very dynamic. And it's a card that you set up. Like, how are you going to play it? When you're the person playing Armageddon, do you play your 5th land? Like, which of your lands are you even playing? You don't want to telegraph it, but maybe you want to bluff it. Or maybe you do want to telegraph it, but you just don't care. And the idea that you could have a card, the counterspell deck's like, oh my God, I can't counterspell your creature because I can't counterspell this creature because I need to save it for your Armageddon. And you're like, well, I'm just going to play my creature instead of my Armageddon. And you just start playing all your cards and they're just not using their counterspell out of respect for your Armageddon.
Yeah, I think all that is true. And it's also very different when we're talking about one copy in a vintage cube and it's part of the experience that comes up a percentage of the time. And this is sort of the foundational gameplay of a standard environment.
Well, okay. At the end of the day, would you think that, Stasis, you probably think Stasis is not a great play pattern, even if it costs 2 and a blue.
Correct.
Do you actually have a problem with Armageddon if it costs 5?
Not really.
So at the end of the day, are you sure that we're talking about a design thing and not just a dev knob where it's a little powerful? And I get that they're not completely divorced topics, of course. Yeah. But the point is that you can have it's not like Armageddon's the most egregious card. It's very strong, but like the last set had Necropons in it. Like you're making some powerful cards.
That's fair.
So the idea that sometimes you're pushing the envelope this way, if this was how you push the envelope one time in 15 years, I'm guessing that that's not like the most egregious thing. It's not like the sensibilities are inherently horrific.
No,
right? It's just
no.
more powerful than you'd probably want to put on that kind of a thing. But
it was in standard or type 2 for a considerable length of time at this point.
Yeah, and it was a little bit defining for so long. I think that the
Yeah.
idea that like Armageddon was so big in like Armageddon was like a dominating force at the 94 World Championships and then 95 World Championships and then 96. Like even like it keeps Armageddon just kept winning. So the idea that you're going to have Armageddon be the best thing going on or one of the best things going on for so many years, it definitely was old by the time 6th edition came out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sympathetic to White didn't have that many.
That's fair. Enlightened Tutor, one of 4 tutors from Mirage Block that are returning here. We have Enlightened Tutor, Worldly Tutor, and Mystical Tutor, which were originally in Mirage, and then Vampiric Tutor in Visions. Red doesn't have a part of the cycle. It has
got it in Urza Saga. During the standard format, they got Gamble, which I wish they would have named as part of the cycle, you know?
Yeah. And Gamble does have the same sort of aesthetic of you're down a card.
Yep.
But like, hopefully you have your thing at the end of it. It's not totally clear. I actually do like Enlightened Tutor and Worldly Tutor quite a bit as designs, probably better than you're supposed to do. But I think it's so different when you're tutoring for a permanent that ostensibly has interaction points going forward than things like Mystical and Vampiric, which are often just getting spells.
And are you talking about...
Or obviously, Mystical's only getting spells.
Are you talking about in the world of 1990s, of, I guess, what is this, the year 2000? Are you talking about in the world of 99, 2000? Or are you talking about in the world of 2024, 2025?
I guess sort of a combination of the two.
Because I am of two minds on these hard tutors. Some amount of the time, this kind of stuff can be cool. In particular, I think it's... especially with enchantment, the permanent based ones, the idea that your deck has a bunch of one-ofs and sometimes you draw them, I think that stuff is dope. I think that tutors deterministically getting the same thing every time compresses what the game is even about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very sympathetic to the idea that even though tutors from a certain lens can be more impactful and exciting, and they make deck building, like they're more interesting from a deck building perspective. I am sympathetic to the impulse variations where it's like, look at the top 5 or top half of your deck, or the top 10 or the top 3, whatever. Those are more dynamic of gameplay actually in the game. But I do think it's nice having both. I just think that the hard tutors, nowadays, you don't want that to be the most powerful one or the cheapest one.
That is one of my time contracting for Wizards. This is definitely my favorite design that I was shocked went to print, but apparently it does have something of a niche appeal. Is just black to exile top 13, then tutor. It's a lot of the same promise of like, it's actually kind of bad, or at least not reliable with one-ofs. Sometimes your option is you had to go get the next best thing. And yeah, I agree that the deterministic stuff is not the best part, the best place to put a lot of PowerPoints, but for the sensibilities of the time, something that got a permanent that theoretically like is not game over on the spot and we play on, and maybe you could find a disenchant or whatever, is kind of a cool thing.
Mm-hmm.
Wrath of God. This is, nuts and bolts sweeper. Was never, again, for the sensibilities of the time, great.
I still love Wrath of God today.
I'm not a big fan of Ignore Regeneration.
No. I mean, as far as that kind of thing goes, I prefer Day of Judgment to Wrath of God.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
But I think that in context, I do like the idea that there are some cards that interact with regeneration when it's literally alpha.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think in general, Day of Judgment is more, because I think that it's kind of sweet when the 5-mana wraths have juice.
Yes.
And the 4-mana wraths are very stripped down, and they don't have to just have a drawback, and they don't have to just be plain like Day of Judgment. But I really like the idea that we put the juice on the 5-cost ones, and that you pay for the juice. You don't.
Yep. But obviously on that kind of effect, you also are very sensitive to timing. So the difference between, like, you are naturally in the market for 4 mana. I don't really have to persuade you to try to play that one because you're getting paid off by just, you cast it on time under duress. But then making the 5s exile or come with a token or whatever.
Well, that's actually part of the thing I like better is when it's exile rather than call out a Trace Buster. Like, instead of just, hey, Wrath of God, and also you get a bonus for every card with the void. So, okay. Whereas when it's exile, if it's just exile every creature, you're the one doing it when you exile the regenerator.
Yeah.
You did that.
Right.
And the idea that it can be used to trace bust a number of things like indestructible, or damage prevention or whatever. The red, protection from red. Like the idea that
Gravecrawler,
or I guess protection from white in this case.
Yeah.
The idea that exile can, it doesn't matter with protection, but the idea that exile can do stuff for you that you can then use to solve your problems, rather than the designer literally just named the problem and said, by the way, this also does that.
Yeah. Moving on to blue, we have Chill. It's a nice one. Lost to this one a lot.
Chill is so much better of a design than Gloom, personally.
How so?
First of all, 2 is so much more than 3.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not more, it's less, but it's much more playable. Like, we're still playing a game.
Yeah.
Second, 4 is way less than 6. But also the idea that you can play Chill on turn 2 and slow them down, not just lock them out, is so different. That like Gloom is so much, you got a chance to do your early stuff, but then you're just like really boxed out of that color. Chill is a lot more tactical. The idea that Incinerate costs 4, it's not good, but it's still a thing you're doing.
Yeah. And also Chill is kind of like something I have liked about it. It's kind of weirdly not great with counter spells. It's not bad, certainly.
There's a tension.
But there is a little bit of a tension of...
There's upside with Mana Leak and Power Sink and stuff.
And if you're doing something proactive with your mana, you're drawing cards or putting stuff on the battlefield, whatever, now your counter spell can be awesome alongside Chill. But if you're just sitting back with counter spells in your hand and a Chill, it's not bad, but you're not really doing it.
It can be bad sometimes. There's a lot of play to it. Whereas Gloom, I think sometimes when your thing is like, oh, I'm going to play Gloom, and now your white weenie deck's got 7-cost Armageddon. Okay.
I know we already spent a little bit of time on the show talking about it, but I just want to keep talking about diminishing returns. This is like one of the best.
Love it.
What I love about this design is, so look at Arc Slogger. That's something that looks kind of comparable on the surface in some respects. Very clearly, that is just a drawback. It's a costing mechanism. And
mostly.
Mostly.
Run your cards out, and then like you deterministic your library, you don't have any library left, so you can just put sold every day the same card back.
Not really what was going on with Arc Slogger for the most part, but yeah, it's basically just reads like a costing mechanism. Diminishing returns, when I saw it for the first time, the drawback made it look more powerful. Like, yeah, of course, there's no way that I could just do this. There has to be some sort of balancing mechanism on it. And the balancing mechanism is simultaneously not real and not fake.
Yeah, it is real insofar as you are definitely changing the nature of your draws in ways that you can feel the more diminishing returns you do.
Yes.
It's very, very cool.
Yeah. Awesome.
It's cool in a way that I think Demonic Consultation missed the mark a bit because of how much it was so all or nothing. Diminishing returns really wasn't all or nothing. It was very exciting to sometimes diminishing returns, and then your opponent, both of their Sarah, if you're the one doing it and you've only got like X number of kill cards, the idea that both of your Sarah Angels could be gone, or if you're playing, if all your Black Vices are gone and you just have bolts, it changes how you're going to actually win. I don't know. I think diminishing returns really felt like it captured the right way that feeling, the dream of Swords to Plowshares Time Twister from 1993, 1994 of we're going to keep playing and my deck is different than it normally would ever be.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like also less repetitive as far as the I'm doing this over and over again experience of something like Time Twister can be too.
There's a lot of bookkeeping that can go along with having to analyze, like when you time diminishing returns and your opponent would have to like start assessing everything, you know, that slowed things down a little, but 10 cards isn't too bad.
And then lastly, I want to give a special shout out here to Zur's Weirding.
Dude, I built so many Zur's Weirding decks.
So did I, and so did all my friends. I talk about it all the time of just I know that Magic is so dope because the number of hours of my life I've spent playing Zur's Weirding Mirrors and still just can't get enough of it.
There is something magical about Zur's Weirding. For how many principles it violates, there is something very magical about it. And its power level's in the perfect spot.
It is it's one that is so bad it becomes funny, like the gameplay experience of it.
That is not a card that would be fun at 3.
And there is an element of something that was very true in my circle. Yours is probably a little bit more advanced than mine at the time. The Zur's Weirding, and I'm just going to play it out.
Oh, I love that. That's the best way. Dude, the Hammerbow Garden's in the set.
Yeah, I know.
It's right there.
It's like Adam Horvath already has one Fountain of Youth going alongside his Zur's Weirding. So like I'm drawing pretty thin here and it's 11:30 at night and we could also just play it. We could start another game with the same decks if we wanted to, but no, we're gonna play it out.
I think playing it out is the fun. That obviously it's like, oh, we both show and it's like, okay, you're gonna miss the next 9 draws. You're definitely dead. That sucks. But it's not that's actually not the only thing that was going on. And the synergies, like the fact that if they try to mill your Hammerbar Garden, you can still, you know. I think it was at least also something different. It made different blue cards, different cards that weren't blue but could go in a blue deck. It made cards different. And the idea that Zur's Weirding would hook us for so long without dominating the game, without dominating how, you know, I think Zur's Weirding is kind of, that's a great one to be an exception to the rules.
I don't know. I actually feel like Zur's Weirding has been underplayed in competitive settings historically. Should have shown up way more than it did. Because there's still so many spots where it's just like 4 mana, the game's over. And you know ahead of time what matchups those are going to look like.
Plus, when you're really skilled and you can just tell what kind of cards your opponent has, you know, so that you can know, is this a good spot to drop my Zur's Weirding or not?
Moving on to red. Balduvian Horde. This is one.
A masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece.
Absolute masterpiece.
It is sort of, for me, I don't know why this is the case. It's almost like the opposite of diminishing returns. The reprint of diminishing returns made it cooler, and the reprint of Balduvian Horde made it less cool.
I think that reprinting Balduvian Hordes is an uncommon is what really, I mean, that's just like
so bad.
But I don't know. Balduvian Horde, you got to remember when it first came out, that card was a $20 card. People went nuts. They were just like, oh, this is so awesome.
Four Mox at the pre-release.
Oh,
that was the trading value. Final Fortune. Very sweet design. I really love it feeling very expressive for red, even though the mechanic of take another turn is not the most red feeling thing. Awesome design.
Awesome design. It gets the game over with too. But it's very dynamic.
Very reliably gets the game over with.
Not 100%, but it gets the game over with. It's a fun one to think about. And I love wild tactics emerging, like the idea that if I can just stay alive for one more turn, I can win. Like as the other person against it. That's a very cool card to be so impactful.
Yeah. Hammer Bogarden.
Sweet design.
A
little repetitive, but I think it's way, way, way different when you're dealing with something like spending 8 mana to do 3 damage where the solution is a giant spider. You know, where you can just play with a 4 toughness card.
Yeah.
That's so different than something that just kills something every turn.
Yeah. And lastly, want to give Little shout out to Jokel Hops. Card I always appreciated when I was younger because you look at Armageddon and you look at Wrath of God, and the how do I break the symmetry of it is pretty straightforward. Like I'm ahead and I get in, or I just don't play with creatures in Wrath of God.
You know, or play with artifact mana, not just lands, or creature artifact, or just like land elves. And
the how do I take advantage of this sort of dilemma with Jokel Hops? A lot more complicated, which I always appreciated.
Variety of ways to do it too.
One of those ways, Zer's weirding. Moving on to green. Birds of Paradise.
Mm-hmm.
The best.
Love it. One of the greatest designs in Magic history.
Yeah, an all-timer.
Pairing I also love so much that has flying.
Yes.
I really do. I love so much. I think having incidental flying on a flavorful design that isn't about attack in as evasion and isn't about block your flyer, I think that's masterful. And then I think that the idea that your card that isn't even attacking has evasion so that you can tactically put your enhancement on it and suddenly you're doing something different. There's so much coolness that goes along. Because I can't tell you how many times Birds of Paradise winning over Moat. Ugh.
Yeah. There's also there's something so sad. Like, where does the fact that it has flying come up the most? And it's typically chump blocking, like in a competitive setting.
Love it.
And the fact that chump blocking is usually something that occurs later on in the game. And you are likely to value your mana accelerator less as the game proceeds. It is still a chump block. You are still just straight down a card, but it feels like you got so much out of it along the way, even if that isn't how the reality really played out.
I think there's something masterful to your opponent attacks with their Hypnotic Spectre, and then you block with your Bird of Paradise and Giant Growth it. Because the idea that it could be safe for them to attack and walk into your trick is awesome.
Yeah.
And Birds of Paradise does that so well.
The thought would never cross they would have Giant Growth on their radar if it was a script sprites. Because it's like, yeah, of course I'm attacking and blocking.
I attacked you with my Hypnotic Spectre. Why didn't you attack me back with your script sprite? Are you really going to chump block?
Yeah.
Whereas the Bird of Paradise, it's like, well, you just didn't play.
Yeah.
You didn't have anything to spend mana on.
Yeah. Awesome. How do you feel about pairing it with Land of War Elves?
Dope. I'm okay with that. It's a little powerful for a lot of formats to have one set have two different one cost green accelerators priced to move. I don't think you really want to do that normally. But I also think that the incentives are really good. I think Land of War Elves is a great design. I think Birds of Paradise is a great design. I think you can cost the game around Birds of Paradise and Land of War Elves both existing. So I wouldn't want it to be like that all the time, but it's totally fine for it to be like that some of the time.
Lastly, a beloved sort of mid-tier, casual, constructed, I guess you could kind of call it, Creeping Mold. Another
hardcore love.
Oh, yeah.
Masterful. Oh, my God.
So
Scores
good.
So well on the appeal to PowerPoints ratio. And it's not that it's bad.
No, it's not.
It is very appealing.
It's very appealing. And the story is so good.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, It's like, how do you do... There's a really good lesson here, I think, which is just, okay, so you start out with Alpha. You have Stone Rain, Sinkhole, and Ice Storm. And let's just...
And Chaos Orb.
And Chaos Orb. Set Sinkhole aside for a second. All right. So it's kind of weird to have two colors do this definitionally, but it makes some sense for green tonally to be destroying lands. Like they control, it's like the weather color kind of, and weather can do bad things to terrain sometimes. So how do you do it in a way that differentiates it from red? And in this set, you get Stone Rain plus Pillage next to Creeping Mold. And you can tell, like, okay, so red does it more efficiently, and they do more of it. Green gets a little bit of it too, but a lot of what you're getting is the flexibility of it being a catch-all rather than just being about the Stone Rain.
I do think that doing Stone Rain, Pillage, and Creeping Mold in the same set is a little gratuitous. Like I even just think Stone Rain and Pillage together is kind of like...
Yeah, I would probably cut Stone Rain, just do Pillage and Creeping Mold. But in any event, gets us to artifacts. Really not a whole lot to see here. I do want to give a shout out to one of my favorite designs here that gets reprinted. Grinning Totem. So sweet. Tapping into the first time you see Jester's Cap and you're like, I can't believe this. And then you see Grinning Totem and it's like, oh, come on, you can't be serious.
Grinning Totem, great design.
Great design. Ornithopter, awesome.
Love it.
Love it. Got Meekstone, not my favorite. We got the Diamonds, which we already talked about. Ankh of Mishra, not my favorite.
Dude, I don't know. I mean, it's not the worst, but there's some fun. There is some fun with Ankh of Mishra, but that's a whole. It's a lot more fun than Dingus Egg,
which is also in the set. I think Ankh of Mishra, you could make the argument that it's way more of a rate thing than it is the play pattern being intrinsically that bad.
Putting down a different kind of card that has you can interact with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the damage from Ankh of Mishra is so like Ankh of Mishra is kind of the Zer's Weirding we can all play.
Yes.
Like Ankh of Mishra, there's a lot of fun to be had with Ankh of Mishra. It's a little stressful. I think by modern sensibilities, that's not really what you want the game to be about, but I think in context, it was a nice one.
I had some in my sideboard of in Burn and a Legacy SCG Open about 10 years ago. It was not good, but it was so fun. Because when you play it on turn 2 and it resolves, and your opponent draws, and they're spending about 30 seconds,
looking at the fetch lands.
Yeah, and just starting to. At that point, it doesn't matter if I won or lost. And to be clear, I lost, but who cares? When you see him thinking about it, it's just that's the sauce right there. And then lastly, lands, the 5 Ice Age Pain lands that we already went over, City of Brass as well, and an add-on here, Crystal Vein.
Hate it. Yeah, I think it's already stresses the format some to make, Heavyweight Battleground and Evan Stronghold, but there's just no doing Crystal Vein at the same time. And I get that they've got Armageddon. They're like, okay, we want to do the Diamonds, so we want to do Armageddon working with the Diamonds. And we're like, okay, we got Yoko Hops and Armageddon. Isn't it really cool to do those things with Crystal Vein and the sack lands? And it's like, well, no, it's really powerful. It's really cool to play 4 Flagstones and 4 Dwarven Ruins with your Yoko Hops, I guess. But I really don't like Crystal Vein in this context.
Crystal Vein is probably one of my most hated designs of all time because
I've played that card a lot.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's busted. It's busted because even cards like Ancient Tomb and City of Traders, which I would argue 1, you're not supposed to do, and 2,
I think both of them are very strong.
And also way too good and stronger than Crystal Vein. At least there is a drama to them. You do feel the downside to them some amount of the time. And Crystal Vein, it's this horrible intersection of facilitating all the wrong stuff without it producing any sort of stress or anxiety or feeling of tension for the person that has it. Just a free roll.
Yeah. I don't I think that both of those are not in a great spot of where the tension, what's interesting about them or what.
Yes.
I think you can do that kind of stuff, but I think it's way more interesting when it's stuff like Temple of the False God.
Right. Yeah. But to your point earlier, it's there's an issue of investment, right? And Temple of the False God is, first of all, it's not a land drop until whenever. And second of all, it implies that I want to play something big. It's not just about facilitating grim monoliths and hatred kills and all that kind of stuff. So that shuts it down for that section, which means we have 2 things left to do. Welcome back to the Resleevables 6th edition. Time to get to some awards. To start with, the Oko Thief of Crown Award for best, quote unquote, most powerful card of the set. I'm going to give it to Vampiric Tutor.
Why?
It's really strong.
What? You're not talking about when it came out, right? You're just talking about in general?
Yeah, in general.
You think in general Vampiric Tutor is stronger than Armageddon?
Where's the inflection point, right?
You think Vampiric Tutor is stronger than Counterspell?
Yeah, I think so.
Really?
I mean, certainly when we're talking about souped up formats, it's at least ambiguous in low power formats some amount of the time. And once you start talking about powerful formats.
What's a single low powered format where Vampiric Tutor is like better than Counterspell.
Literally this the standard format involving this set alongside Obliterate, all the sack lands, Nether Spirit, etc., etc.
I don't know, man. I bet
it's just the best deck that no one ever played or ever heard of. So
doesn't sound very good.
It was busted.
I don't know. Sounds like Counterspell is better personally, but okay. I don't know.
All right. Well, your answer is.
Well, now I'm thinking about Counterspell. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think Armageddon's one of the strongest cards ever, but I also am really sympathetic to Counterspell. I know that in context, it's weird because 6th edition came out during Urza's Legacy, around the time of Urza's Legacy. And as a result, when there's like Legacy and Destiny, there's so much busted stuff going on that like Vampiric Tutor was completely egregious in context. But yeah, I might still have to just give it to Armageddon.
Okay. I also kind of want to give a little bonus point for Vampiric because Geddon has been in a lot of core sets leading up to this. It's been the answer before. Oh. But I also think Vamp is just busted. I don't know. Armageddon, Counterspell, also very defensible answers. The Carnival of Souls Award for weakest card in the set.
Imperial Seal, so much better than Vampiric Tutor.
Yeah, instant just ruins everything. It's a recurring thing here. My vote for weakest card in the set here, I guess. I'll pander to the audience a little bit. I'll give it to Stormcrow.
What? Mine's gonna beat yours.
Go for it.
Cop Blue. Got to protect myself against your Stormcrow.
Well, then who has the more powerful card?
I'm the one who has to lose a mana every turn at parity.
Okay, sure, but you're like, you are hedged against future Stormcrows.
Actually, though. I'll tell you one that's even worse than Cop Blue, though.
Okay.
Animate Wall.
That was one of very few cards from back in the day where I never had any interest in trying to play with it.
The thing that tilted me about Animate Wall from the beginning, literally from day one, Glyph of Destruction only giving +10/+0 to a blocking wall. This is what you needed to nerf? A blocking wall? You couldn't just let me have my wall of wood animate wall attack for 10. No, I have to set up some sort of busted like Sword of the Ages double Glyph of Destruction. I mean, like, come on.
It's one of my favorite things to think about during this era is for examples like that. I want to know, because it had to have been someone who was the developer that lost to that sort of sequence, who said, yeah, we got to put blocking on this thing. This is just too dumb with Berserk or whatever.
Well, they wanted to like lean into what makes walls special. Like Legends had a real cards that don't do anything. It was like cards that make it. Legends, the three main themes were cards that don't do anything, cards that make sure nothing can happen, and cards that make it so that if nothing's happening, now something different is going to happen, is going to not happen. Like, oh, I'm going to animate my wall and it's going to not do any damage. Or, oh, now my wall isn't going to block your guy anymore. It's going to lock your guy down for a few turns. It's like, what do we even... I mean, it's probably, your listeners probably are well familiar with this, but it's still just, it's to me so a thing of beauty. The idea that Raging Bull, like Raging Bull is the Legends common with power. Like the idea that, anyway.
Doomblade Award for best non-rare in the set. I like to bias towards things that are just more in the role player space than just erroneously assigned. And I'd like to give a shout out to Octavia Orangutan.
Dude, Counterspell, come on.
Yeah, I know, but like, come on.
Are you talking about like power?
I'm trying to combination of power meets dopeness meets my own personal interpretation of spirit of the award.
Then probably Octavia Orangutan deserves it because you're dealing with a set with the diamonds. And I think that putting Octavia Orangutan in at the same time of the diamonds is is beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. Obviously, Counterspell's really powerful.
Yes.
But, it's also showed up a lot and been really powerful a lot.
The Oboro, Palace in the Clouds, one of in the set. My answer, I'm going to be giving this card a lot of awards during this segment here. I'm giving it to Zer's Weirding. It's just such a sweet card to tutor up, and then we play it out.
You want to tutor? See, I just want a raw dog that is.
You do both. I mean, it's both.
And then just hope that there's a Hammer Bogart in my top 10 cards.
No, I played it in both.
So what exactly is the rules of this? What is this thing being judged on?
Your propensity to have, or your experience, or your observation of playing a very limited number of copies of this card and it being sweet, either as a tutor target or just a thing to draw sometimes.
Well, then I can't count Zer's Weirding because I just drew it way too often. The first thing that comes to mind for sure, I'm just trying to figure out what's even the alternative, is Desertion.
Oh,
I love.
That's a really good answer.
I loved the fun of one of Desertion. That's
a really good answer.
It made me really happy.
Yeah.
I have experienced a lot more joy in my life because of playing one Desertion in a lot of decks.
It's also the perfect card too for that experience, because when it's bad, you just die and your opponent never knew it was in your hand. Just no one has to know. But when it's good, they see it and feel it.
And you did it too. When they play into your Desertion and then you take the thing, it is so satisfying.
Yeah, I saw you coming from a mile away.
And there's a fun mini game of, I know you I anticipate that you probably have Desertion and I'm going to play different. So I'm going to play my worst cards. But then the person who's bluffing the Desertion is like, I can't believe this donkey's just sandbagging the Sarah Angel. They got so much respect for me. I'm so clever. It's such a blue mage experience. Love it.
All right. The Mystic Confluence Award for best vintage cube card in the set. Really going to have a tough time. Oh, I know my answer. Sorry. I'll give it to Flash.
Yeah. I mean, Flash is pretty freaking busted. It wasn't that good in this set, but in Vintage Cube, it's a lot stronger. I don't know. I don't want to just say Armageddon all the time.
No, I'm going to say Zer's Weirding a bunch. You say Armageddon a bunch.
But honestly, I think Flash is a pretty reasonable exception in this case.
Yeah.
Vampire Tutor's kind of sweet, but
Mystical too.
Yeah, I like Flash.
All right. The Smothering Tithe Award for best commander card in the set. Now, I want to give you a little bit of again, some lore of the video series here, where I would pick a card that was like powerful or at least had multiplayer context, that I thought was a celebration of the spirit of multiplayer. Cedric would go on to EDH Rec and just pick out whatever the most popular card was. So Cedric's answers, you're gonna be astounded here. Brainstorm and cards similar to Brainstorm were frequently his answer, which I think is horrible. I want to celebrate the idea of multiplayer, and in that spirit, I'm going to give my award to Zer's Weirding again.
You have definitely never played Zer's Weirding in a multiplayer game, then have you?
Three player tops,
dude.
We never got to
that. That's not real. That's not how it goes. That's some theorycraft stuff. That is not real.
No,
that is not real. You're going to find out real fast in a multiplayer game. No, it also scales horribly.
Oh, yeah.
It's horrendous. Oh, yeah. And it's like one of those, did you think that did you think that Ristic Study gave people bad choices, this bad decision that oh my God. Like us sitting around Wizards Weirding debating that's not real, man. That reject. Give me a different answer.
What's your answer?
So in that kind of a vein, I do think that Yokel Hops is actually a sweet it's way sweeter than Armageddon.
Yeah.
For that kind of a thing. But I like stuff a little bit. Doesn't necessarily love it, but stuff like and it's not power level strong enough anymore, or never was. But Daring Apprentice sitting there, making it so that you don't mess with me because I have my card that I could use, but then you just don't. It's got to be so modest that you don't feel compelled to go after me to get rid of it, but at the same time is nudging you away from messing with me to go mess with somebody else.
A little bit of all other things being equal. I'm
a Howling Mine guy. I've played Howling Mine so much, and I've enjoyed a lot of games with 4 people with Howling Mine just going on, where we're not even doing anything because it's just I'm playing Howling Mine because it's sweet.
Right.
And then other people want to leave me alone because I have a Howling Mine. It's sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would I want that to go anywhere? It's like we all played it basically.
Yeah.
The Pack Rat Award for Best Limited Card in the set. I suppose begrudgingly we'll give it to Hammer of Bogarden.
Well, how do you want to cost it? Like, how do you want to like how do you feel about Pestilence?
Are you giving it bonus points for lower rarity?
Right.
Totally legit.
Because like, in terms of actual win percentage, I think Hammer of Bogarden was the highest win percentage correlated card every time it was in a set for draft.
Okay.
I know that it was for Mirage by an egregious amount. And I assume that in this set, it's more modest than it was in Mirage. But, contextually, Hammer of Bogarden was just unreal in Mirage. It was not as good in the set. It was still unbelievable. But so if we're going to go in absolute terms, I guess it's Hammer of Bogarden. And if we're going to go in grading on a curve, Pestilence.
Fantastic. All right.
So it's really in the set like I think it is.
The Circle of Protection Award for Best Ozer in the set. I'm going to give it to Perish.
Best, like, powerful? Or if it's powerful...
Most egregious is probably maybe a...
Well, that changes it. Perish is certainly more egregious than Boil. Boil, I think, has been better more often. But I think that that's only because they stopped making Boils at a certain point. And there's just so many other lands that are kind of... Perish is offensive. Perish is definitely... And I've played so many Perishes. I've also splashed Perish in so many decks. Perish has done a lot of bad for the game in a number of ways, because I think that green creatures, back when they used to make Perishes, they needed to make green creatures better, not worse. And I think Perish is just...
I also think it's a side color pie, but probably an even worse spot for Can't Be Regenerated than Wrath of God.
Oh my God.
Like, come on, let me keep my Riverboa.
Dude.
Everything else is dead.
Yeah, I think if you're going to do something like that, I think that it's way, way, way cooler to do, like, for instance, if there was a 2-mana Perish that only does 3 damage, or like a 1-mana, whatever you have to make it. But if it's something like I can perish all your red creatures, like I by dealing 3, AoE deal 3 damage to every red creature is so much cooler, because you could be like, well, you're the one who played all these small red creatures. And then you're like, actually, I'm so clever. I played Wildfire Emissary and Mishra's Factory, and I get around it because I can like play how, or I save, I have my dragon, or this is extra incentive to play some Balduvian Hordes instead of some other.
Yeah.
So I like when that kind of stuff, and you want to be careful because you don't want to, you want the solutions to actually be able to solve some of the problems. I just think the Perish is so heavy handed, and the problem wasn't, they have some creatures that are just like, they have some green creatures.
My black deck can't kill.
It's like, Jesus.
Yeah. And there's also, I think your point there about like the deal 3 to all red creatures or whatever, like there is an incentive to push back on the all 1-drop experience
or the other
baseline.
Or the other way, if you want to have a green Perish that's like, imagine if there's like a cheap Perish that just kills every green creature that's power 3 or greater.
Exactly.
And then only the small ones live. You
Yeah.
know, there's some texture to it.
Yeah. There's this is so powerful, and it is painting with such a broad brush that there is you can't answer the question of why are we trying to go after this person? Pyroclasm is like, yeah, cheap creatures and just all 1-drop, whatever. Having some stuff that pushes back against that at a high rate, very justifiable.
I like bifurcating what gets hit or not to some degree. Like with Boil, it's kind of nice that, okay, sure, maybe it destroys some of the dual lands and all the basics, but it also doesn't destroy these other lands. And the other person actually could have played more lands that still make blue mana that didn't get destroyed by Boil. They really could have.
Yeah.
There's stuff you can do where some of the stuff gets hit, some doesn't. The order you play your cards matters. And keep in mind, I'm not saying the Boil's like the best play pattern in the world, but it's a lot like playing around Perish is not a great experience.
Especially because they have other cards in their hand too. So if you're trying to go one by one, they're just like picking you off. Like
that said, I definitely have won a lot more money in my life because of Perish. I have definitely been the Perisher, not the Perishee.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been hit with a Perish. I haven't cast it nearly as much as you have, but I've certainly never been on the receiving end of it.
Dude, I've also just perished my own green creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes Perish is just so good that you're still playing it.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. This is because maybe I'm behind.
Like, once in a while, I've had to perish my Urnam, when they've got 4 green creatures. I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
All right. Memory Jar Award. For what the heck were they thinking? Card in the set. I still can't get away from Zer's weirding.
I don't know. Really, over Crystal Vein? I mean, I guess I get what they were doing with Crystal Vein.
Yeah.
But there's Hammer Bogarden. You know what they were doing with Zer's weirding.
Yeah.
Besides,
but
they
it's
also
just
like Joy.
Because if we're just playing like low power or whatever, that we just have some cards and we're playing or whatever, you would not notice a Crystal Vein. And Zer's weirding you would feel no matter what the circumstances.
Yeah, but that doesn't make it like, what are we even doing here, right? Does it? Or
kind of to me, like,
okay.
What is the level of play at which, like, it's reasonable to assume this card is at like probably a little bit south of tournament playable in most circumstances, which means part of the distribution is it does show up in decks or in sideboards some amount of the time. And what does that experience look like? And then there is what is this looking like we've each bought 10 packs and we have some card sort of situation. And I think in both of those, it fails the test pretty spectacularly of like, what positive could we possibly, besides pandering to specifically me?
I don't know, man. And me. I think Zer's weirding is a nice fit. I think I like Zer's weirding. As far as like bad guys go, but I don't know. But I guess to me, what are we even doing here is my answer is pretty lame, but I just think doing Fountain of Youth at the same time that you're doing the Lucky Charms.
Fair.
It's like, you don't need to put this much of the architecture of the set into making Zer's weird and playable. What are you even doing? That's fair. Yeah, they are kind of, you should have to Zer's weirding off of your freaking, your cups and your thrones and your stars, whatever. Certainly your crystal rod.
Right. Yeah. That's pricey.
But I mean, I just like Hammer Bogarden with Iron Star anyway.
And then lastly,
with and against,
the blank award for best card name in the set. Name. I gotta give it up for Diminishing Returns. That's going
to be a hard one to beat. Like, I do like Counterspell, but at the end of the day, you can only go so far with this is so elegant. Diminishing Returns is so perfectly evocative and captures the flavor, the vibe. I'm giving it to Diminishing Returns too. That's a slam dunk.
I also like both. I like Enlightened Tutor as a name too, because that is sort of a characteristic that you would assume at a baseline is for a tutor. And so the idea that it implies that there's a whole bunch of non-enlightened tutors out there, I have a soft spot for.
I like Worldly Tutor for that same reason, though.
Yeah.
Like, Worldly to me is even more than Enlightened. Enlightened, it's like, who's the judge? But Worldly, it's like, that's just objectively true. But Diminishing Returns, I think the name of Diminishing Returns helps make it stronger.
Yes.
I think that it literally helps put you in the right frame of mind to feel like this is a stronger card.
Yeah, and I do think that there's often the history of card names that are like known terms of phrase or colloquialisms can be a little shoddy sometimes. And this one is just, even if you have not heard the term diminishing returns in the context that it's normally used, the word is diminishing returns. Just get over on this thing by itself.
Dude, what about Heavy Ballista? I mean, I guess that's more of a draft thing, but I don't know that I love Heavy Ballista as a card.
Oh, for the implication of the light ballistas?
No, I don't mean from the name perspective. I just mean, sorry, maybe I'm back a topic, but Heavy Ballista being in the set.
Oh, yeah, sure. Because that was known. at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That brings us to close it down. What card, in your opinion, won the set? The biggest highlight.
The biggest highlight?
Yeah.
What's your answer so I can get the right context for?
I think Diminishing Returns would be my answer here. Because it is a dope core set card in terms of if I wanted to introduce someone to Magic and be like, check out this cool game, here's what you can do with it. That's one of the cards I would show them for sure. Maybe like Shivan Dragon first, but once we're talking about some baseline understanding of the rules and the mechanics.
Exile 10 card, like that's the thing you show somebody on day 31 more than day 1. Right?
Yeah. I'm saying, but like in terms of okay, we've been playing a little bit and we have a sense of the giant growth, lightning bolt, creature experience or whatever, but there's a larger game that is out there. This card is like so cool. And I think it does, it is emblematic, a little bit of a philosophy of the pivot from 5th to 6th that you touched on about just there's bangers in here. It's like cards you want to own, cards you might not have gotten the chance to acquire the first time they were printed, and cards that are anywhere from fine to good for in standard, but not like causing anyone any harm.
How do you feel about Howling Mine?
Really high on the list.
Because I think Howling Mine has so much appeal at every level for so much in so many ways. Like there's some formats where it can go wrong or whatever, but I think Howling Mine has just made the world a more fun place.
Definitely.
A lot of times, including 6th edition.
The exchange that I have seen variations of so many times in my life. It's like you are a relatively new player or not competitive or whatever, and you have 4 Howling Mines in your deck. And I go, I think you should probably cut the Howling Mines. And you go, absolutely not. Why would I ever do that? And I go, well, you don't understand that like it's actually kind of weak if you're not optimizing for it, because your opponent goes first with the cards and the Howling Mine person just completely checking out of the conversation. Like I could not be less interested in whatever you have to say if it involves cutting my Howling Mines.
It's very telling that there's 25, you could pick a top 25 different styles of Howling. Like Howling Mine's been good in so many ways. I'm going to deck you in Black Vice and Stormbind and Icy Manipulator. Like there's a million things.
Or just playing with Chain Lightnings and Lightning Bolts. And I'm going to just be playing a cleaner game.
Or you have Necropotence and you don't get a draw step now.
Yeah.
Like there's so much dopeness. But also in terms of just a simple card that just adds a lot of appeal for the set. I think Creeping Mold actually was really, and it wasn't like it was even like impactful at a real high level during Urza Block, but like people still cared.
Yeah.
Even though it's so modest.
All right. Closing. Give this a grade 1 to 10. And for the purposes of the grade for this set, bundle in the rules update as part of the grade.
God, it's so hard without having the context of what are the others, but
I gave Alpha a 10 and I gave Chronicles a 1. Give you a sense of the range.
There's no way that Chronicles is a 1, personally. It's like a 2. Maybe.
Well, okay.
I don't know.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Chronicles is pretty bad. The problem with Chronicles is how offensive it is.
Yes.
Like it should be a -2 in some regards.
Uh-huh.
But it is playable.
Sort of.
There are sets that are not.
Yeah. Okay.
But I don't know, man. It's pretty high on the list. It's a very appealing core set. And there's a lot of bangers and a lot of awesome stuff. So maybe I give it a 7. I don't know where you draw the line though, because to me it starts getting weird when you're trying to deal with cross era. Like Khans of Tarkir and Innistrad are so clearly a 10. So I'd be much more likely to give this set an 8 than a 6.
Yeah, no, I think for me with my grading, a lot of it is, all right, what is the known technology of the time? And did this forward the technology?
Yeah.
Or was it actually taking steps backwards?
I think this forwarded so many things. I think that in context, it was a giant step forward.
Yeah. I give 6th edition an 8. I think there are a handful of reprints that are just sort of playing with fire for no good reason. Setting that aside, I think that this was the first, as a player who started during Revised, obviously, Revised those are the cards. So I'm buying that, right? 4th edition comes around. Okay, Strip Mine and Mistress Factory are here, and I can't get packs of antiquities. Cool, but in terms of anything that I would be like interested in, not really. Then 5th edition was basically there's literally nothing here. And then 6th edition, even though I was playing and collecting cards the entire time, there were enough bangers in there that I was like, oh, there's sweet stuff in here, even though it is still all reprints.
It's also fun to play with on like 4th and 5th.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think huge step forward. As far as the rule stuff is concerned, I thought the point that you made was really good in terms of damage on the stack in absolute terms is not the way you want to do it, probably. But in terms of we are trying to codify and solidify this scattershot rule set, I don't mind going a little too far and cleaning up later rather than falling short. Like if you're going to do the thing, make sure you actually do it. And it isn't even like damage on the stack was, even though I believe it's quote unquote bad, it still was around for over a decade. Like
it was fine.
There was no crisis with it. It was just not perfect.
And I mean, well, there's a temporary crisis that we knew was going to get resolved of stuff like Wizard Mentor. But at the end of the day, you're still just playing a children's card game. So it's like the crisis is like, you got to keep it in scale. It's not like you're playing a children's card game and there's a stasis in play.
All right. Well, normally we would go through and sort of re-record all of our grades up here. But with Cedric Phillips off to Gamer Valhalla, clean reset. Patrick Chapin giving
8. I'm giving it an 8.
All right. We're okay. We're both 8s, both 6th edition fans. Very nice set, I think, on balance for where sensibilities for core sets were at a time and moving it forward in a direction that I think, even if you don't like damage on the stack, the net upside of this compared to 5th or 4th. It's just,
I just remember at the time the amount of people who were genuinely excited. Like that, this was part of the buzz. Like people were talking about how this is actually a core set that we actually want to play. Like we're actually like, this is sweet instead of this watering down. I also liked that it was smaller. The 5th edition was bulky and yet unattractive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Although I still enjoy, as much as I don't like 5th edition, the fact that there's the artwork for Flight from that set. And I get to look at it from now and again. That does make it worth it in some respects. So with that, we are winding down our 6th edition episode. First of all, I would like to thank Patrick Chapin for joining the show. It's been really fun chopping it up with you. It is a little bit different for me to be in the host role, but I was in tears or approaching it several times. And your insights, perspective, experience at the time, since like at this point you were actually good at Magic where I was not. This was really fun. So thank you for hopping on board and glad to be running this with you.
Dude, it's been a pleasure.
All right. So
and will be a pleasure for some time to come.
If you are watching this on YouTube, we would appreciate if you subscribed to the channel. You can find all of our most recent episodes through our archives, including Ursa's Destiny, much anticipated, which is up now. You can also find the most recent episode of the Resleevables Tournament Edition. Pro Tour Atlanta 1996 is up right now. We just rebuilt the studio. It's ready to go. So instead of defeating Cedric with cards he really doesn't understand, because we played a game where we just played land tax on turn 1, and he's just like, come on, like, where do we go from here? Going to be stepping my game up against one of the masters.
You're talking about Atlanta 96?
Uh-huh.
Man, Atlanta 96, that was a Hammer of Bogarden tournament.
Yes, it was.
Holy cow. The number of people who opened Hammer of Bogarden in their sealed, who then went on to make day 2 or top 8,
Well, they were bottlenecked by the amount of mountains they had. We went unpacked it.
I'm just telling you, if you go look at the win percentage.
Oh, yeah.
It was unbelievable. It was the first time that a single card, it was.
Well, I 3-0'd Cedric, torching him out 3 times. So that was that.
Love it.
You can also find snippets of our Unsleeved podcast, which Patrick Chapin is also now a member of. Oh, we're going to get into that. Don't you worry. And you could also watch our Crack-a-Pack videos. Now, that gets us to the Patreon. You can go over to patreon.com/theresleevables to sign up for our Patreon. There's a variety of benefits that come at various tiers. One of the benefits at the $10 or $25 tiers is being drawn into the Crack-a-Pack winnings. So after we review these sets, we do a Crack-a-Pack. One of these 6th edition boosters will be opened and we'll be breaking down the contents. And one of the other booster will be sent to one of our Patreons at the $10 or $25 tiers. There is no sign up required. We get all the information automatically through Patreon, so you don't have to notify us, or if you want to be drawn for one or the other, it's all automated. So if you sign up over at patreon.com/resleevables, you'll get autographed cards from myself and Patrick Chapin over here, stickers, play mats, depending on your tiers. And then at the $10 or $25 level, you could be the lucky winner of a 6th edition booster. And if that's not enticing enough, I've never opened one of these before. I don't know if you have.
Oh, yeah.
We got an English booster of Portal 3 Kingdoms coming down the pipeline here. If you subscribe on Patreon, also early access to shows like this, you get access to the Unsleeved podcast as well. You want to follow us on Twitter at theresleevables. I'm still updating the account, post things from time to time. Make sure you're following us there. Tales of Adventure, again, shout out to our sponsors here. Make sure to use promo code Resleevables at checkout for 5% off of all of your purchases. If you live in the United States and you're attending the large SCG events or MagicCons, whatever, make sure to go to their website. They're vending almost all the large shows, so you can be coming up with buy lists and sell orders ahead of time. Michael has great instructions on how to sell your collections a little bit more efficiently if that's something you're trying to do. Also, shout out to BoshNRoll. Make sure to be subscribing over that YouTube channel, BoshNRoll. Brian Coval playing Eternal formats every day of the week. And that'll about do it here. Winding down the episode here, we got Mercadian Masks coming up next. We got Portal 3 Kingdoms coming down the pipeline soon. And so for Patrick Chapin, Patrick Sullivan, thank you for joining us here. And we'll be back soon.
What
all you got to do is clap.
Like,
this is going to be good outtake material right here. All you got to do is clap it down. Yeah.
I make it clap.
You make it clap. And then now he's got the audio and video files synced if he needs to.
Perfect harmony.
In perfect harmony, finally.
Just like 6th edition.
Well, that does it for Cycles. We'll be back here momentarily with the trivia of 6th edition.
Well, actually, no, hold on. Is that all the cycles? What about the dragons, man? Although I don't know. I guess I didn't really finish the cycle the same way. But anyway.
You mean Canopy and?
Yeah, like, because I guess they didn't do all the dragons. They just did like Volcanic Dragon, Pearl Dragon.
Yeah, I think Volcanic Dragon might have been uncommon.
Totally. Yeah, there's like, there's also some cycles of soft cycles. They had this theme of we're going to have like the build around, or, you know, there's a cycle of enchantment build arounds. And anyway. We'll figure it out in the individual cards. I'm sure they'll come up.
All right. Choi, that's another one for the reel at the end.